Hi. For many of you who follow my channel ArtIsRight, you will know that I have provided you with a wealth of resources on display calibration, color management, and I sprinkle in a few gear reviews every now and then to keep life interesting. I feel that the next logical progression of this channel is to talk about printing and paper profiling, which is the reason why I'm standing in the middle of this setup. For this video, what I'm going to do is specifically focus on an overall printing workflow within Lightroom. Down the road, I'll release a video on a workflow that revolves strictly around Photoshop, and then as we progress, we will talk about paper profiling, which device to use, how to make the best profile possible, and then how to match what you're seeing on your screen to what's coming out from your printer. Let's continue on this color accurate journey together. I'm Art and ArtIsRight. Before we start, subscribe if you're new and hit on the bell icon so you'll be notified every time I upload cool new videos like this. So before we go into Lightroom and talk about the overall printing workflow, let me share the setup that I have in front of me. I have my 16-inch MacBook Pro and it is linked to the BenQ SW270C. This is their 2K hardware calibrated display and it has been calibrated, and I use this display to evaluate many prints that have come out from this Epson P800 series. I have always been an Epson printer fan. They have never sponsored me or anything, but I always genuinely love using their product, and I have been using their product for more than, I would probably say, 15 years now, where my first Pro printer was an Epson, and as always have done admirably well, so I will continue to buy Epson. And the other tools that I have is the i1 Studio. This is a color spectrophotometer. This will do display calibration and also print profiling. If you want to profile your own print, this is definitely a device to consider. Or the other device that you can use to profile, or rather calibrate your display, is the i1 Display Pro or Pro Plus, which is the one here. And for displays, I generally prefer to use the colorimeter, which is this little device here, because it does a better job at calibrating displays and is also much faster at calibrating displays as well. Don't get me wrong, the i1 Studio is no slouch for display calibration, but you know, just a smidgen better on the colorimeter part of things. And lastly, I have a desk lamp. This setup, I would say, is probably maybe between $40 to $60, depending on the equipment that you piece together. The lamp itself, inside there is a D65 LED light bulb. So this is a light bulb that has been calibrated to 6500 Kelvin, which is going to match the screen white point I have calibrated to. So when I print things out, I can evaluate it right here, right now, and see if it matches my screen or not. And I also happen to have a dimmer, a Lutron dimmer, link up to this too. So for instance, if I'm viewing the print here and I feel like this is too bright, as you see now, I can also dim this down, as you see. And this dimmer costs about 20 bucks or so, and they make one specifically for LED. I'll put a link to all of these in the description below the video as well. Let's jump into Lightroom. Because this is an overall printing workflow in Lightroom video, what I'm going to do is use a pre-edited image. If you'd like to see how I edit and organize these images in Lightroom, leave a request in the comment section below. This way I can add it to a future video request list. All right, so from Lightroom, what I'm going to do is take this image directly into the print module. This has already been pre-cropped and everything, but something to keep in mind too is that if you are going to print to a different size or a different crop aspect ratio, so on and so forth, what you want to do is pre-crop the image in the develop module. This way you have the crop exactly what you like it to be. Now, my images is already cropped to the original aspect ratio, which is captured from the camera as a 3:2 or 4:6 and so on and so forth. So this is the perfect size that I want. I'm going to go to the print module now. So I already have some of the settings already preset here, but I'll go over all of them with all of you again. The first thing to do before we go in and print anything is that we have to choose the page setup. We need to select the printer that we are going to print with and specify the paper size that we are going to print on. So I have my Epson selected, that's good. And then this is where you would come in and choose the paper size. You can also choose the different load-in method for the paper too. You can do borderless, you can do roll paper, so on and so forth. I'm just going to do what is considered a regular sheet fetter in this case, because with the paper that I'm going to print on, which is this one, the Epson Velvet Fine Art paper, this is a 13x19 sheet. It really doesn't matter because the settings that I have to dial in the printer driver dialog and on the printer itself is going to override most of these settings anyway, so I will leave it as such. This is also where you would choose the orientation of the print that you're trying to make. If you have a vertical picture, you want to select vertical orientation, horizontal, so on and so forth. Right now, my picture is horizontal, so I'll keep it as that. Press OK to exit this dialog, and the next thing what we're going to do is focus on the left panel in print module. This is where we can go in and control different things. There's different layout style from the very top. You can choose different image setting. You can say zoom to fill. You can have it rotate so that it would fill. Repeat one photo per page. You can do different things. You can also have a border and have it stroke the border. I don't want any borders here, so I'm going to leave it out. And next one is layout. This is where you would go in and control the margins. If you have a borderless, you want to have all those showing pretty much 0. But because we're going to print with some margin here, I'm not going to worry about margins too much. And rather than having this picture go into a weird size, what I'm going to do is constrain it to 12 by 18. I can simply just come in and just dial in the value as you see there. So now I have a 12 by 18 print. So when it prints out, it's going to be 12 by 18 inch in size, which is going to be perfect. The next up in the panel dialogues are all the guides that you can either show or hide. I'm not going to worry too much about that. You can even have it show dimensions, for instance, and it will tell you that this is an 18 by 12. You can unshow that. It depends on what you need and what you want to do. None of these guides will show up in the final print, so you don't have to worry about that. Next up, what I generally do with my prints, specifically for myself anyway, especially if I want to get some info about the print, the profile that I use, a lot of times that I do page option and choose page info. What this will do is that Lightroom will print out these information at the very bottom right corner of the page, and it's going to say, or bottom left corner of the page, and it's going to say sharpening low, what profile I use, what printer I use, so on and so forth, which is great. And then sometimes if I do need it, I can also print the file names too. But as you see, the file name is really encroaching on the overall size of the picture. So I'm not going to do a file name for this particular printing. Next up is the print job dialog. The print job dialogs contain a lot of information that we need to unpack because this is primarily responsible for a successful or a failed print. So starting out with the print resolution. The 240 ppi resolution tends to be best for inkjet printing. I've done tests at 300, and amazingly enough, the way how things were scaled, the 300 looks slightly softer than 240, but you can test that out on your own too. Print sharpening, I choose low, media type, glossy. Well, it's not really going to be glossy, it's going to be matte, so I will choose matte media type. And you can also choose to have it output in 16-bit. That means there's more color depth in general. It's going to get interpolated into an CMYK color output based on the ink set anyway, so I'm not really going to worry too much about that. Next up here, under color management, this is where we want to concern ourselves with, because right now I have the Velvet Fine Art paper selected, but most of you, when you come in here the first time, you're going to see something very similar to what I see on my screen right now, which is managed by printer. And that is not good because your colors are going to go everywhere. So what we want to do is specify the profile. If you click on here and there is a profile there, excellent. Choose the profile that matches with your paper. If you click on there and there's no profile, you have to click on Others, and Other will pull up this Choose Profile dialog. What you're seeing right now, the SC P800, these are the Epson included paper driver for all the Epson manufactured paper. So these are the OEM paper from Epson. If I want to use a third-party driver, I can download the profile from their website, or I can also make my own profile using the i1 Studio. Either way that you do, you want to make sure that you load the profile into the computer before you launch Lightroom. If you don't do that, Lightroom is not going to be able to see those profiles. Because we're going to keep this video extremely simple and we're going to focus on the Epson stock paper, the Velvet Fine Art. I already have that selected, so this is good. Like I said, in the future, I'll do demos with other papers from Canson Infinity, and that's where we start to layer in the complexity into things. So I'm good with that. I'll press OK. So next up, there are two rendering intents that we have to concern ourselves with as photo printers. There is perceptual and relative. I'm going to hover over these because Lightroom have their own set of description. So for perceptual, preserve out of gamut detail, but may change in gamut color. And there's a little bit more to that. Essentially, the rule of thumb is if you're printing anything with a person or people's skin tone, it's best to use perceptual because the way how Perceptual scales the outer gamut color down is that it scales everything down altogether. So essentially it takes this large gamut that you have in the photo and it scales everything down evenly. This means that if you have a color that's slightly more saturated or super saturated, it's going to get a little bit more dull because it's scaling everything down. This type of scaling works best for skin tones because human skin tone homogenizes, but there's a lot of gradation and change between colors, and that's the reason why we recommend Perceptual for skin tone. The next one is relative, and this is the way how Lightroom puts it. Preserves color accuracy, but clips out of gamut detail. So essentially what this really means is that in relative, any color that can print within that gamut, that fits within the printing gamut, will be preserved. Any outer gamut that cannot be printed are generally scaled down to like the outer rim of the gamut to preserve it as much as possible, but the core of the gamut itself is maintained. This is much better for printing landscape photo, for printing anything with graphic or anything with saturated colors, similar to this bug picture that I have here because I want this in full saturation. So I am going to choose relative. From this point, you can send the pictures to the printer right away, but it's probably not a good idea. The next thing what you want to do is, rather than click on print where it would go directly to printer, what you want to do is click on printer down here. And the printer button itself will pull the printer dialog up, as you see in the middle of my screen. This printer dialog is probably one of the most powerful things that you're going to have to concern yourself with as well, because it really controls the final outcome of what's going to come out from these awesome inkjet printers that you have in your studio. All right, so in the middle there it says layout. You can check one of the first things by clicking on layout and then going to color matching. You want to make sure that all those are grayed out, and it should be. If they're not, that means that there may be some problems going on with the way how the driver or how the settings are being set up. Next up, what you want to do is click on printer setting. In printer setting, I am going to choose the paper source, the media type, the paper setup, and everything. The paper source, I can choose sheet feather. The problem is if I choose sheet feather, Velvet Fine Art, none of the fine art papers are available, so that's no go for me. And this is how Epson is forcing you to use the front feeder for the Velvet Fine Art paper. So now that I have front fine art set, I can choose fine art paper, Velvet Fine Art, which is the one we're printing on, and is automatically changing the ink. As you see there, it's changed from photo to now a matte black ink. The next two things, print mode and color mode, you want to make sure that those are grayed out. If they're not grayed out, and if it doesn't say off here, no color management, as you see it's grayed out right now, it means that the printer is going to run the color management on its own, and that is a bad idea. Usually these are not going to be grayed out if in the option earlier you choose printer manages color, but because we bypassed that, the program has already gone in and set this up for us. For output resolution, you can choose to do super photo, which essentially it sprays in even more finer amount of ink on there. What I'm going to do is just choose super photo, which in my testing, there is very little difference between the two. It's almost like not even like discernible at all. High speed, I'll have that enable. Essentially high speed, what it does is that every time the printer head passes, it would spray the ink onto the paper. If you have high speed off, it will print in one direction. It will reset the head, print again, reset the head, print again. So it's a much slower process. Some people think that without high speed tend to produce better result. This is going to technically be really up to you and your testing that you want to run. I have been mostly using high speed and I haven't had any problems with that. And fineness detail, you can check that. Essentially, it has something to do with the way how the printer is like spraying ink for like the greatest detail possible. From there, what you want to do is now you can click on print. If you click print here, it's very similar to clicking print right there. The difference between clicking on this printer button, as I mentioned, is that it pulls up that printer dialog up, which is extremely important. So now what I'm going to do is go into the printer queue page, and the printer page is now telling me, well, the paper source selected in the printer doesn't really match with what you have loaded here. I haven't loaded any paper yet. So essentially what this is telling us is that because I'm using fine art paper or Velvet Fine Art paper, I have to do a specific load in method. So I'm going to take one of the sheet out from my bag here, and then we'll load this paper in. So we'll open this up. And rather than pulling the tray out right away, I'm forgetting one thing. So I'm about to go print. Let me cancel this quickly. What I'm about to do was really bad, because when you have an inkjet printer, before you go print every time, what you want to do is you want to run a nozzle check. So I have Epson printer utility pull up this is going to it's going to be installed on both Mac and PC, so you'll be good. And what I want to do is simply load in a regular, thin sheet plain paper that you would use in your laser printer and your inkjet printer, whatever you may have, and just load it in there. So before we do anything, what we're going to do is run a nozzle check to see if there's any clogged nozzle. This is something that I highly recommend, especially if you don't print that often. If you print often, you print like one page every day, like every now and then I would probably run a nozzle check. But if you haven't printed in a while and you come to print, it's always great to run a nozzle check to see if there's anything clogged. Because if it is, you want to clean it up before, because if you don't clean it up, you're going to get banding or stripe running across your print, and that's not desirable. So let's see how our nozzle check is looking. Nozzle check is fairly quick, and on mine it looks really good, and it doesn't look splotty like what it sees there, so there's really no cleaning needed. This is a good nozzle check, so I will leave that here and I will click on finish. Now I'm ready to go and print my image. I will put this tray back in and open the front feeding tray. This is a very Epson specific method. I will close the top sheet feeder and then open the back manual sheet feeder and pull in the paper support guide up like so. And from here, I am going to insert the paper. I find that on this printer sometimes it's a little bit difficult to load the paper, because if the paper curls up a little bit like this, it's really hard for the printer to, take it in, because the margin inside there is really tight. So what I'm going to do is align the paper all the way to the right in the guide, just like so, and I'll just align it to the very front, like what I have right now. And what I'm going to do is simply click on load. This is going to load the paper in. I already pulled this up so that it supports the paper. On a Velvet Fine Art, it's not really too big of a deal because the paper is fairly lightweighted. If you have a 300 GSM paper or something like that, I would probably definitely pull it up, because the paper is going to sag and bend over backwards. So it's now feeding the media. And then it says open the output tray. So we're going to pull this one open and then close this down. Select the paper on the printer itself. So I have 13 by 19 Velvet Fine Art. Press OK there. So now this is ready to go. And let's lift on the wow side a little bit and just click on print. Because I already gone in and dialed in the settings earlier, you can double check it, but we're going to bypass it because it really doesn't change, especially if you haven't quit Lightroom or anything. If you quit Lightroom, I probably would go in there to just double check. All right. So now it's receiving the information. It's going to start the print process, and we're probably going to speed this up a little bit, but I'll also show you as well what's happening during the printing process so that you can see. As you will see right now, the printer head is laying down the ink in both directions. As you will see, it's fairly fainted color towards the back and more darker towards the front. And the reason why is because these printers layer on different ink droplet colors as is going every pass. And what you get is the paper coming out in the front. And now that the printing is done, let's close the printer up and have a look at this. This, I think, is extremely cool because that bug is not even larger than the tip of my fingernail, which is really awesome that I'm able to blow it up this much, and you can see the details and the patterns in the eyes really clearly. It's kind of matte with gridded pattern. It's really cool. So what I would do here is run a proof on the picture or view it under the proper lighting that I have set up. This is matching again with the white point calibration of my display. If I feel that this is too bright, this is the reason why I have the dimmer, so I can dim the images if I need to, so that it will match closer with the display. And the next thing what I'm going to do though is that I can be finished here. If everything looks good, then you're good, you can go. But if you go into Develop module in Lightroom, what you can do is also soft proofing. And soft proofing is really cool because I can load in different profile, but I can load in this Velvet Fine Art paper profile and choose to simulate ink and paper in. And I can do a comparison side by side. And granted, right now, I'm really comparing this print to what I'm seeing on my MacBook Pro screen. Ideally, this would be facing me and I can see it a little bit better. But what I can tell you right now is that across these three mediums, the paper printout, the MacBook Pro screen, and what I'm seeing on BenQ, the color and just the neutral background in general looks really close to each other. This is really an amazing printout that I'm able to get here. So anyway, I hope that you find this Lightroom overall printing workflow helpful, especially for those who are just getting started with printing. We're going to get more into details later on about printing and the many things you can do with it. For now, I think this is a good taster of what is to come. If you have any questions about this, leave it in the comment section below. Give this video a like, subscribe if you're new, hit on the bell to be notified every time I upload cool new contents like this, and until next time, ArtIsRight.